Okay, so welcome to episode 19. Today we're going to go back to Corinth. The last couple of weeks we've been in Ephesus, and a lot of things happened. This is the third missionary journey, and a lot of things happened while he was in Ephesus this time. Of course, we started seeing him performing some miracles, healing people, casting out demons, and things like that. One of the main things that happened, though, was this group of people from the city of Corinth came over with a letter. They had had some problems in the church and inquired of him, and we know that he wrote this letter, First Corinthians, and the first letter to the Corinthians, and sent it back, and got word that it really didn't have the effect, and so he wrote this like severe letter, and well, actually, he went over to visit, and they kind of didn't. He didn't receive a welcome reception there, and they kind of had drawn themselves towards these charismatic leaders, and so he went back and wrote this severe letter to them, and once he leaves Ephesus, he goes up to Troas, and he runs into Titus, and I think I said Silas before, but Titus was the young church leader that he met in Troas. They really told him that the severe letter had had its intended effect, and that the church in Corinth was getting back on track. And so he sat down and wrote a second letter, uh, what we know as Second Corinthians, second letter to the Corinthians. But um, and so then he's going to ping pong through Macedonia on his way back and visit with them. And so we're going to see here. In fact, I want to look on the map first. So he left Ephesus and he goes up to Troas, and this is where he meets with Titus. And then he's going to ping pong here, Philippi, uh, go back to Thessalonica, to Berea, back down to Athens, and he ends up back in Corinth, and he spends 3 months there this time, and they're really only recorded by one verse in the Bible, those 3 months. And in fact, I'll go ahead and read that real quick, uh, and um, and show you here. And it says. When he left Ephesus, there was this big uproar about Diana the Ephesians, and they wanted to worship Diana the Ephesians. So Acts chapter 20 starts there. After the uproar ceased, Paul called unto him the disciples, embraced them, and departed to go into Macedonia. And when he had gone over those parts, he had given much exhortation, and he came into Greece, and he abode there for 3 months until he found Jews laid wait for him. And so that's really this here. He abode in Greece for 3 months is really all that we see that the Bible documents of this third trip to Corinth. But since he's here for a third time, and we spent the first trip during his second missionary journey, we spent a couple weeks talking about the city itself, some of the mystery religions, just kind of the corruption that the church faced, and then, of course, as we looked at the letters that he wrote, we talked about some of the problems that the church was having. But today, I want to talk a little bit more about like the Isthmian Games, a little bit more about Erastus. I think we mentioned Erastus yesterday. One of the things I can tell you about these games, there were four primary games that were held, and the Greek culture was basically centered around Greek mythology, and so the Olympic Games, really, if you're familiar with Greek mythology, there was a god named Zeus, and Zeus lived in some celestial place called Olympia. And so the Olympic Games really were designed as a Greek um, observance to honor the god Zeus. And so all of these games really follow the same tradition. And so you have these Pythian games, which really were in honor of the god Apollo, and we talked about that temple of Delphi that was across the water up on the mountain, and they would bang the drums and gongs all night. Well, this temple of Delphi is where they worship this god Apollo, and so the Pythian games were basically to honor that god. And then you had these Nemean games, which was a um, kind of an honor to the god Heracles, who supposedly I think he slaughtered a lion from Nemea or something like that. But anyway, so those games, and I actually have a video I'm going to put in the description box below. That in the 1990s they started recreating these ancient Nemean games, and it's a really interesting video actually if you want to see like a modern day reenactment of some of those games. And then the fourth one was the Isthmian Games that took place here in Corinth, and the Isthmian Games were really a way to honor the Greek god Poseidon, who was the god of the sea. And so that's the four games, and we're going to talk about the Isthmian Games here. Um, before we get into that, I want to let's look at a couple of these things. Why he's here in Corinth this next trip, he's going to write a letter to the Romans, and so I do want to cover that, and that's where we are here on this timeline as far as the books of the New Testament. He's written First and Second Corinthians, and now he's going to write Romans since he's in Corinth. Another one I wanted to look at was this timeline of Paul's life. Of course, he was in Ephesus when he wrote First and Second Corinthians, and now he's gone back through Troas, Philippi, Thessalonica. He goes all the way back into Corinth, and this is where he's going to write his letter to the Romans. And so that's going to kind of catch us up there as far as those timelines. And so I wanted to read this, and this is like my revisited sheet that I had for each of the cities. And this says during the rise of Athens, Corinth fell into ruins, and so Athens really became the center for intellectual um, advancement, I guess, and it's also where the Olympic Games really focused on. Athens was a primary center for gladiator fighting, so it it kind of surpassed Corinth in that way. It aligned with Sparta during the Peloponnesian Wars and with Athens during the Corinthian Wars. As a member of the Achaean League, came into conflict with Rome, was captured, burned, and sacked by the Roman consul Momius. The men, women, and children were sold into slavery for a century, and it laid idle until the slaves were freed, and it quickly became the commercial center of the region. And that's where we are as Paul has gained entrance into the city. So Paul left Ephesus, heading to Corinth by way of Macedonia and Achaia. Along the way, he received word from Titus that the letter he had written to the Corinthians, this severe letter, had its desired result. Relieved, he sent another letter ahead of his visit. Finally, after traveling through all of Macedonia, basically, he arrived in Corinth, and this visit was the third. And he stayed through the winter months for 3 months, hoping to resolve the issues discussed in the two letters. While he was there, he wrote a letter to the Romans. The journey was different in that Paul was not there to start a church. His mission this time was to assist the church with growth. The Corinthian influence from the worship of mystical gods took place all around them. It was difficult for them to change their deceptive and sensual ways. Paul's primary battles were with sexual laxity and divisions among Christians. So the two letters were written to the Corinthians to counsel them on Christian living. And from Corinth, Paul wrote his letter to the Romans. And so that catches you up there. There's a Wikipedia page on the Isthmian Games if you want to go check that out. And it talks a little more about, how these games started early on and what drove them and when they were played. Pretty interesting stuff. But I also, let's see, I looked at our map here, and so we're over here in Corinth. I have this sheet a little more on the city, and well, let's look at this book of Romans. Paul wrote a letter to the Church of Rome, the capital city of the Roman Empire, and at this point in time, I think Paul knew that he was going to end up going to Rome. But he wrote the Romans while in Corinth and near the end of his journey. Unlike some of Paul's other epistles, he did not write to correct false theology or rebuke ungodly living. He wrote primarily to introduce himself to the church and provide apostolic instruction. And so the things Paul wrote to stress the righteousness that comes from God. And that really is the primary theme of the book of Romans. Romans is a fantastic book for new believers. If you are a recent convert, I would say read Romans, 3 or 4 times in a week, just over and over and over, and see how that helps you. Topics include principles, spiritual leadership, divine judgment, sovereign election, and security of salvation. And so you it talks about, his greeting. He always opens with a greeting. It talks about his ministry, basically confirming his apostolic credentials. Then he talks about Christ's righteousness, or the righteousness of God. He talks about the provisions of God's righteousness, demonstrations of righteousness, receptions of righteousness, behaviors, and then the conclusion and benediction. And so that's the letter to the Romans that he wrote while he was there. I wanted to bring this up. This is a little bit more about Corinth, and I'm going to go through this real quick because we've talked about a lot of this. But Corinth was located in southern Greece, about 50 miles from Athens. And if you look on the map here, I think I just got rid of the map, but it's about 2 miles south of the isthmus that forms the land bridge between the main landmass of Greece and Peloponnesus. The isthmus is less than 4 miles wide. Corinth controlled two major harbors on both sides, a trade route of Asia and Rome. In ancient days, small ships were dragged across the isthmus on paved roads. And I've got some pictures here I'm going to show you of all of this, of how they did that. Even more important, the land traveled north and south. The sea traveled east and west, and through the Saronic Gulf and Gulf of Corinth, lapping the eastern and western shores of the isthmus respectively. And because there was this twinned seed uh, isthmus, is why Pisidian was so well revered here in this area, and why the Isthmian Games really kind of were designed to honor Pisidian. Ship captains plying northern Mediterranean route between Europe and Aegean Sea much preferred to bring their vessels through the sheltered waters of the two Gulfs rather than to add to the journey, the sea around the southern coast of the Peloponnese. And so that's one reason they drag ships and cargo across. The city flourished from 8th to 5th century because the leading role it played again against him as a member of the King League. The Roman Council burned and destroyed the city in 146 and left a heap of ruins. Of course, the old Greek city is part of the old marketplace. There's 7 columns from the Temple of Apollo, and I'll show you that picture. That foundation's been preserved. Majority of the population is Greek. A large number of Roman military veterans live there as well, and a sprinkling of Phoenicians and Phrygians. The Roman character of the city is reflected by many Latin names associated with it in the New Testament: Aquila, Priscilla, Crispus, who was a leader in the synagogue, Lucius, Gaius, Tertius, Erastus, and we're going to talk more about Erastus. He was a town treasurer who became a convert. He was a Greek convert. Quartus, Fortunus, Achaicus, and so you have a lot of names associated here. Corinth became the capital of the Roman province of Achaia. In Rome and Corinth, the old temples were restored and enlarged, and so you have all this stuff. And so in there was a Jewish synagogue. Crispus was the ruler, of course. Paul baptized him, and Silas and Timothy basically baptized the others. You have these religions in Corinth, and you'll find calls to the gods of Egypt, Rome, and Greece all in there. And so you have the up on the hill, the Acropolis was the temple of Aphrodite, and we talked about the prostitutes that would come down into the city at night and serve the wine shops there. And I got some pictures of the city, the sailors, because the ships would unload their stuff there. There was always sailors in town, and so there was a lot of drinking, a lot of lasciviousness, and things like that. Of course, of equal fame was the Temple of Pisidian. You have other gods and goddesses that were worshipped there. You have Hermes, Venus, Fortuna, Isis, Demeter. So a lot of them. Asclepius, we talked about him, the god of healing. He had a daughter named Hygienia, probably where we get the term hygiene. So just a little bit about that. Artemis, let's see, you have ruins here. The Achaean road, which we'll talk about, was the road that they drug ships across. They now, in the 1800s, they actually built a canal through there, and so ships can go straight through. But we're going to talk a lot about that. And so let's go to. I want to go to this slideshow. This was actually put together by a Mennonite. What do you call it? A Mennonite school for seminary. A Mennonite seminary group put this together, and so this is the uh, temple to Apollo, these seven structures that were still here. And up on top of the hill here, this was the a temple to uh, uh, Aphrodite, where the thousand temple prostitutes were. So you had these two temples right there. And here's the isthmus over here, and you can see there's a black line here, which was the little road that they drug stuff across, and then the parallel lines here is the actual um, the canal that they've cut through at this point in time. And so this was a road that led right into town, and the on both sides of this road were structures over here, a lot of like wine houses and stuff. I think the synagogue was actually right over here on the right side of this road. The marketplace was at the end of the road. Of course, you could see, the temple up here and then up on top of the hill. This is a reconstruction that began in 46 BC as the Romans reconstructed it. You can see where the theater is here. And so there's a lot of stuff there. Another picture of the temple there. These are just some close-up shots. You can see this doorway over here on the corner, lower left corner of a building that they could have gone into, probably a bar or something. This is the canal that's been cut through today. It was cut through in 1887. And this is the road that they drag ships across. It's still there, but they don't drag ships across anymore because the ships can go through the canal. Here's another picture of the road that they would drag ships and stuff across. And so this again is showing the double line here is the canal, and the black line is the road. And so this is a picture from the top of the hill looking down. This is over here by the coast. This is modern day Corinth, what it looks like from the top of the hill. This is the military fortress up there. They had a military group that stayed there. Here's this stone is a stone that was placed in by Erastus. And so this is Erastus, who was the city treasurer, and we see in Romans 16:2. And I got some of these verses here, and I want to go look at this. So Romans 16, was it 2? Says that you received her in the Lord and become saints. I don't know if I got the right. Let me see what 16:23. That's the verse I'm looking for. So let's go down here. Gaius, mine host, and the whole church salute you. Erastus, the chamberlain of the city. And so that's what they called him. He was basically a treasurer, and at the end of his service, he laid this stone. He had actually paid to pave a road, and so he kind of set up this monument to himself. But that's a monument to Erastus, who became a convert believer. And so that was interesting. A lot of these are repeats. Here's another theater. This is a statue of the god Asclepius, the healing god. And of course, this is his temple, and there was a pool in there that they can bathe in. Here's some of these terracotta things. This is a picture of the temple from the outside. These are some people from the Mennonite seminary that took part in putting this together. They went out and took pictures, but here is where the games, and see this lists the Olympic Games, the Nemean Games, Isthmian Games, and I actually, like I say, I got that video to the Nemean Games that's in the link below. But the Isthmian Games, this was like their little locker room area. They had a washing tub here where they could wash and prepare themselves. They would oil themselves down before they ran. They actually would strip down and run naked. And so a lot of the Jews that would run in these games would hide their circumcision. So they didn't want people to know that they were Jews. And in 1 Corinthians 7:18, we see Paul telling them, if you're circumcised, don't hide it. If you're uncircumcised, don't hide it. And so I was going to look at this as, if any man is called being circumcised, let him not become uncircumcised. So basically he's saying there, this is not right. I mean, if you've been circumcised, what are you hiding it for? And if you haven't, then don't. It's not a big deal either way. This is a little tunnel entrance to the racetrack that they would have gone out on. And here's the track itself. The starting gate is this pillar, and they would have the lines here. And this actually they would run to receive a wreath, and all this is in that video too. But look at 1 Corinthians 9 here as we look. says, "Know ye not that they which run in a race run all, but only one receiveth the prize? So run that ye may obtain." And it's interesting to me that all throughout Paul's ministry, everywhere he went, he used what was happening in that local area to witness to people. When he was up in Galatia, he used the things, that were there to witness to people. When he was in Athens, he used the statue of the unknown God to witness to them. And now that he's in Corinth, he's using the Isthmian Games and this temple to Asclepius to witness to them. And it's just fascinating to me that he does this. And this was uh, Dionysia was a first century female athlete who ran races and trained other runners. So here's a picture of the track. You can see there were like a little bleacher section on each side of it. You can't see it real well, but here's a better picture. You can see the track where they would run, and then the people would sit on the side. And of course, here's a meal that they would eat. And of course, these meals were, they considered this meat worship to idols, offered to idols, because these games really were to honor these pagan gods is what they were for. And so these meals were kind of uh idol meat. But he's saying, that really doesn't matter either. So I want to look at First Corinthians 8 here. It says right here, verse 4, as concerning the eating of those things that are offered and sacrificed to idols, we know that an idol is nothing in the world, and that there is none other God but one. And so basically he's saying, they're offering this stuff to people that aren't real, to gods that don't really exist. And so, and he does say down here, if it becomes a stumbling block to somebody, then don't eat it. But that there's nothing to it, because those gods don't exist. And so, but that would be a regular meal, meats and cheeses and vegetables. And so I think that's an interesting picture there. And so here's the Bema seat where Christ, or where Paul was brought. Some more pictures here. This was a home, like a upper class house. This would have been the atrium where people would come in and meet, and maybe even have a pool in there where they could wash their feet. So this is what the an outline of it would look like. So but that's some interesting stuff there. And they were here at the end. So um I wanted to kind of go through all of that and show you that and talk about the Isthmian Games. And I think I probably went over a few minutes on this one, but uh, it's fascinating stuff. And I'm going to go back through next year and do a Bible study just on the city of Corinth, and really dig really deep into a lot of this stuff, and spend a lot more time on these pictures and on these traditions that they had. But we'll leave it there. From now on, he's going to bounce back through Macedonia collecting money for a famine. And so things move pretty quick until he gets back to Jerusalem. But I appreciate you joining me today. We'll talk to you next time. All right. Well, God bless you.